When I was a child, I had a thirst for knowledge. However, coming from a low SES household, the outlook for me appeared grim in comparison to my classmates. And in the beginning, that seemed to hold true. Repeated grades, remedial programs, specialized education, each of these further segregated me from my classmates and pushed me out in terms of inclusivity. Despite the roadblocks placed in my way, I believe the relationships I formed with my literacy sponsors made all the difference in my reading and writing achievement. These relationships built up by my educators and I helped develop the skills I needed to succeed and helped me reach the position I am in today. As I said, I was born in a low SES household, and it remained that way for many years. By this, I mean there were no books in my house, and my parents did not read to me, leading to a lack of exposure to literature at a young age. From preschool to the first grade, I showed enjoyment in school, but it appeared I failed to retain any of the fundamental knowledge given to me. I believe a lack of solid relationships with my teachers resulted in much of the information feeling lackluster and unimportant. I was routinely pulled from class, made to speak and read and memorize the alphabet in hopes of curing my lisp, helping me catch up in reading comprehension and in writing. I even took summer classes just to keep up. In second grade, I met my first literacy sponsor in the form of my second grade teacher, Mrs. Price, and my situation quickly turned around. Though I do not remember it, my parents credit her with being the first teacher to get me to read. Through her teaching methods and the personal relationship I built up with Mrs. Price, I went from falling behind to a grade or two ahead in terms of reading and writing. By third grade, I had met my second literacy sponsor and my teacher, Mr. Ratliff. Mr. Ratliff invigorated my desire to read even more during his in-class reading sessions. He read to us The Wizard of Oz, Pinocchio, The Phantom Tollbooth, among others. Through this exposure to literature I deemed outside my reading level, and through the close relationship I built with Mr. Ratliff, I believe I jumped even further ahead. Through the 4th to 9th grades, I found myself lacking literacy sponsors save for one Principal Mundinger. As my elementary school principal, Mr. Mundinger hammered in the phrase, "reading is the key," into my mind. Like Alexi and Malcolm X, I furthered my literacy understanding by reading any book I could get my hands upon. With no teacher adequately challenging me, and with the curriculum seemingly primarily based around STEM fields at these grades, the responsibility to maintain my reading seemed to fall more and more onto my younger self. By the 8th grade, I had stopped reading completely, and I had limited to no experience composing essays outside of short stories for teachers exercising their expressive philosophies. And now, we have returned to where we started. By sophomore year, I'd once again fallen behind compared to my peers, and it seemed I would slip into remedial programs once more. At the start of my sophomore year, I maintained a 2.5 to 2.0 GPA, and my self-esteem rested at an all-time low, and I had lost faith in the education system. Most importantly, I'd lost faith in myself. It was then that I met my last literacy sponsor in the form of my English teacher, Mrs. Smith. Teaching in ways I'd never experienced before, Mrs. Smith reached me like no other educator had. By the time we finished the Odyssey, our first unit, my grade was resting at a C, and I had no intention of maintaining that grade until Mrs. Smith stopped class to tell everyone I would receive an extra 10 points on my test, specifically because of how well argued my short essay section was. It was then in that brief moment of rhetorical philosophy that my life turned around. This one single relationship with an amazingly effective literacy sponsor pushed me to become an English educator myself. This trend continued as I took every class she taught, showing me all of her teaching techniques. She exuded a formalist philosophy when grading major grammatical errors we repeated on essays and assignments, an expressive philosophy for any number of creative assignments ranging from posters to videos, a rhetorical philosophy for argumentative papers and rhetorical analyses, and a mimetic philosophy through exposing us to the world and connecting our experiences and knowledge to our assignments and papers. By senior year, Mrs. Smith had solidly become my literacy sponsor. This continued into Composition 1, the KU equivalent of Engle 101 and 102, where the foundations of rhetoric and composition came into focus. Dominant impressions, rhetorical analyses, memoirs, presentations, and argumentative papers filled the course. Here, the principles of Summers and Lamont came into play, with several drafts and workshops having been conducted to further our understanding of critically analyzing papers, as well as building upon critiques and suggestions of others. Beyond that, Mrs. Smith pushed us to speak from the heart, and to write truthfully from a place of passion. Describe the world as you see it, and support it with the evidence that you have at hand. She played heavily in McCrory's English in the way of writing academically, but not writing simply to appease a teacher professor one had at the time. Instead, she wanted the student to convince her that they were right, that their paper deserved a certain grade. Thanks to the relationship I built up with Mrs. Smith, by graduation I'd bumped up my GPA to a solid 4.0 for the entirety of my senior year, and just managed to salvage my cumulative GPA to graduate with honors. Mrs. Smith ingrained these skills into my mind, and by the time I entered my freshman year at KU, I was overprepared and I craved a challenge. This final relationship I built up with my literacy sponsor remains with me to this day. Her lessons, her beliefs, and her teaching style heavily influenced my ideology as I entered into the KU School of Education. She is the reason I strive to be an educator, so that I might be an effective teacher just like her, and that I might be the sponsor to turn a student's life around when they hit rock bottom. Throughout my traditional schooling career, the relationships I built up with my literacy sponsors assisted in cultivating my composition and rhetoric skill set, and in cementing my position in my post-secondary educational career. With the numerous roadblocks in my path, such as low SES, lack of literacy sponsors, and my struggles maintaining pace with my peers, these educators and influencers provided me the tools necessary to succeed both academically and socially. Without these relationships, I have no doubt I would have floundered and fallen further behind my classmates. With these relationships, I've gone farther than my parents and I ever could have imagined. And at the end of the day, I am still a child with a thirst for knowledge.